I think that first year on a boat, I kept track of the books, and I read over 100 books. I was one of those kids who could always draw. You know, I was still kid drawing, but you know, I could fashion things in perspective and, you know, tell stories with pictures. I think the idea is to keep enough materials around that you can play.
I met him in graduate school in 1978. We'd just both been accepted into the program. When we were growing up as artists, New York minimalism, that had all kind of ran its course. Yeah. And the minimalist kind of New York-based stuff in particular kind of came to a logical conclusion, which was to draw everything out of it. And so from there, artists began to put things back into art. And I think that's where Tom kind of comes along into that continuum.
I think the thing that I never really even got to tell Tom or anybody is that what I really respected about Tom is that he put out more energy. He gave more of himself. He was very selfless with the students and with people, and I don't think he ever got the respect for that.
Thanks, Tom, for sitting a spell in the orange chair here at the Art House. It's really great to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks for inviting me.
When I was a student of yours, you know, you're giving me this construction of really art history, of the important art that may relate to what I do. You've had this broad understanding of art history that seems to find its way into your work in many ways and many forms. There's so much I don't know about you.
A man of mystery.
A man of mystery, yes. You will remain that, I believe. You were born in New Jersey, but you moved when you were 5 to North Hollywood. Now,
right here in LA.
What was it like to be growing up in North Hollywood, Santa Monica area?
It was a time, you know, the 50s, the 60s, especially the early 60s in Los Angeles, where many of the freeways weren't built. The San Fernando Valley was wide open. I remember, you know, at 10 with buddies hiking Griffith Park.
Right.
You know, I mean, there was no a few big streets. We'd put on our World War II surplus, you know, packs and belts and little army hats, and, you know, and we'd go hike. My mother always drew, and so I grew up kind of mimicking my mother's pictures. I was on my own by the time I was 16, so it was hard to finish high school on time.
Okay.
I went at the age of 16. I started working in TV and films and the music business. And this is, you know, this is around 1967.
Okay.
So things are really happening in LA at that time. So, you know, I would get jobs, you know, on a film or on a theater. I did a lot of stage lighting. Because of where I grew up and the availability of, you know, TV and film at that time, I thought that that's what I was going to do. Basically, at a certain point, I decided this isn't what I wanted to do.
Right.
So I redirected my education towards art.
We went to high school together. Yeah, in the San Fernando Valley. And I'm in a car club, he's in a car club, and we had a mutual friend named Michael Heinrich. You may have heard of Michael.
Sure.
You know Michael Horst. So Michael sat right in front of me in most of the classes, and we would take turns And in other classes, we'd take turns like taking a nap. And the other one would wake you up because we'd be surfing.
Yeah.
And so I met Tom one time, and I liked Tom right away. You know, when he was young and handsome, he had the blonde hair, crazy hair, blue eyes.
He's a person who's seen so much art, and as you watch his art over the years, you see all these references to different, art history, particularly early modernism, early 20th century modernism is obviously something that he really knows very well. Nods to constructivism and supremativism, but also he's tapped into Cubism throughout his career and a little bit of surrealism, but it's just, and in ways too that demonstrate that he has a really intense knowledge of those eras just by virtue of the references that he's made.
Even though there were people in my family that had some artistic talent, none of them had an education.
Okay.
I'm the first to I think to get a high school diploma, let alone
Wow.
a college degree. After being at LA Valley, I transferred to UC Santa Barbara.
Right.
The aesthetic that I started to form, as a painter,
Yeah.
really started at Valley College. It was a reductive. June Harwood was one of my teachers. She was one of the first hard edge painters. Fidel Daniele, kind of the two of them, the maker and the conceptualist.
And then, of course, photography, because Tom originally studied photography.
Right.
He went to UC Santa Barbara to study photography. So he's very that interested in what you see and how the image frames up, and that informs his work too on a lot of levels.
When I got to Santa Barbara, there was kind of the old guard, and then there were a lot of young visiting lecturers like Doug Edge and Dick Dunlap, and some older artists like Jack Tworkoff, who came. I'm looking around at schools. Okay, I knew the importance of UCI in the early 70s. This is now we're talking about 1978.
Right.
So a few years earlier, UCI changed the face of contemporary art.
The school opened, UCI opened in 1965, but I think that it opened with about 650 students, something of that sort. And we had we started with an art department. I was really the first one hired to kind of help the studio art department get going with John Copeland, who was a fiery, controversial, but I always thought interesting fellow who originally had come over in the early 60s from Great Britain to first San Francisco, and then he was also one of the first hired at UCI. So he was a go-getter, and he put together that very early, looking back on it now, revolutionary studio art department, hiring a number of the young West Coast artists who were getting into what became minimalism. And
would this be Kaufman, Terrell?
That's correct.
McCracken?
Craig Kaufman and Bob Irwin.
Bob Irwin,
yeah,
sure.
And of course, and Eddie Burrell, and those early years, Ed Moses did some teaching, and then also there was the British group, the Hockneys and the Richard Smiths.
There was Craig Kaufman, Tony DeLap, Jim DeFrance in particular, and John Paul Jones.
Yeah.
Everyone knew John Paul, and many of the artists that I admired who were teachers of mine, he had been their teacher, and so it was like the source.
He was very, influenced by John Paul, and John Paul was more about the lifestyle of the artist and how to conduct yourself and how to have focus and how to have energy and have that discipline. I think that's one of the big things that he picked up with John Paul. And then too, with John Paul later, those works were very elegant that he was doing in wood and that kind of, reverence and attention to detail.
Christmas of '77, I drove down to UCI. Nobody was around except John Paul. And I sheepishly went in to meet him. And he said, well, did you bring your portfolio? And, I was at least that savvy at that age. I did, and on the spot, he offered me a TA-ship and grad school, and I thought, oh my God, and we hit it off like that as people, as humans. And I am a romantic at heart.
I don't know, he was either an opposing car club or a gang or something.
That's what I heard.
Yeah, and so we had, the interesting thing, so John Paul Jones had a retrospective at Barnsdall Park, I think in, I don't know, maybe it was like the early 80s. I'm there, and I'm John Paul's student, and because John Paul was a big influence on me when I went to Valley College after that. And I look across the room, and it's like hair went up on my neck. And I'm looking at this guy walking in, and we're kind of like circling each other. Do I know you? He goes, yeah, Eric. And I go, Tom? Oh, no way. We were in opposing gangs at the time,
It was like a cage match. Everybody's just trying to outdo each other all the time. And it was just constant. It was 24/7 with that shit, right? And what we ended up doing was beating down the remaining conceptual people and relegating them to a scrap heap, which we loved, right? But it was so loose then. I mean, it was like the antithesis of an academic program. And the faculty was like, they had become so beat up by conceptual work and heavy, cerebral, philosophical, word-driven performance video, that when we came along at that particular point in time, and with all the wildness and the craziness, they just embraced it. It was like, you guys can do whatever the fuck you want.
They knew they had made history, or they must have.
They did.
Previous to when you guys showed up.
They did, but there was a lag between guys like Burden and all that and this. So we're about, 7 or 8 years there, right? So that had worn off, and they were tired of the wannabe Burdens. And there was a buttload of them, Everybody got a big black jacket on and, talking about semiotics and bullshit. Like they actually knew what the fuck they were talking about, because they didn't. And, so here's the thing, is like now, Tom and I are only about 3 years apart, but at the time, it seemed like a lot more. Because he was married, he had kids, and we were hanging from the rafters at that point. I mean, there was like, I remember going over to his house and his wife just throwing us out. We gotta go. Right? It was like, well, we weren't quite petulant enough to challenge that.
So, this is one of my favorite devices.
Training gives you.
So, what kind of spurred this on? I'm making this sort of conscious return to working on paper, and with the idea that I'm getting back into printmaking. Printmaking was where I started off. I'm starting to think in terms of, in particular, aqua tints, etchings, and specifically screen printing and silk screen, because that's what I'll be teaching. And it's been 20 years since I taught it. So I'm actually kind of looking forward to that.
Tom always had this thing going where, when he wants to talk to you, he's not talking like you and I talk. He lowers his voice and he elocutes to you. Because it's important that you hear every word that I tell you, because each word has a meaning. Long pauses, low tones. That's how, I always feel like I'm talking to my teacher or something when he's around.
When you're dealing with making artwork that's highly reductive and deals with forms and basic principles, to give it, heart is often very hard.
Right.
Okay?
I understand that, yeah.
And I think that those three guys each had that.
DeLap, Kaufman, and John Paul Jones?
Right. They could communicate, they had the heart, and they could work highly reductively.
When I first knew Tom, he had a seriousness about his interests that I found rewarding.
Sure.
Tom is such an old and dear friend. So many places we have been over the years, exhibitions out of state. I believe it was a Picasso show.
With Tony DeLap, the work is a hybrid of sculpture and painting. It's extremely elegant in that elegance, it's like a beautiful formula, a beautiful scientific formula. It has beauty and elegance, and kind of therein lies its richness.
How would you describe the art scene postgraduate work?
The blue chips were doing fine, but it was really hard to kind of break in. I was doing the large shaped and metal pieces. Almost all of us made some good money and had some good shows mid to late 80s. I've always had to
Supplement.
support myself and my family. So, I would teach a little bit. I would do this design work and
Yes.
building
Right.
and art services kind of
Yeah.
thing, and then work like a demon in the studio as well.
Construction,
Okay.
and that, again, that will have changed. You know how like Frank Gehry, bend shapes.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I'm not doing that, but if you think of that two-dimensional surface that we work on as painters, what I want to do is I want to make that space more literal. I want to break back from it, pull out from it. I want to create spaces that are tweaked.
I had moved back from Orange County to downtown LA. That bubble was breaking. I was,
The late 80s.
90, 91.
Okay.
Okay. I could see the writing on the wall,
Sure.
When life was good, I had bought a very small sailboat
Yeah.
and kept it in Dana Point. And I thought, I'll put everything in storage and I'll just go live on the boat for the summer.
Right.
And see how things pan out in the fall. Well,
Summer turned into,
2.5 years on the boat.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, moreover, I went from a 3,000 square foot studio to a table on a boat about this big to
Wow.
work. Because you asked me about the Information Age series, clearly I could not do the large paintings or shaped pieces that I was doing
On a boat.
on a boat. I just started reading. No TV. It turned out to be a great period in my life.
Yeah, it sounds great.
It's like living in nature. I got up at dawn. I went to bed. At dusk. At a certain point, it was like I got to make something. So I have all these books around me, and I would I'd go to the thrift store, and I'd pick out these old books, usually really bad ones, hardbound, and it was partly to keep my spirits up, to do something kind of funny. And I realized it was sort of a Dada process I was doing. So anyway, I'd take these books and I would never read more than a couple of pages ahead. I would paint out all the words
Everything
except for
but.
just a few.
Right.
Yeah, and I'd sort of reinvent the novel.
But it's more
6,
poetry
7
than
words.
prose.
But it tells a story.
It does,
Yeah.
okay.
And at first I thought this is fun, and I started to illustrate them. And in the dictionary there's pictures. You want to know what a bowler hat is? You not only get the
Description,
definition, you get a little
illustration.
picture. I started to collage those little images into the book. Then, there comes a point where I'm a painter.
Right.
I want to paint these things.
Right.
I did a fair amount of work that was not just a lot of objects. I did some assemblage that dealt with these images and creating, again, with humor, in a sense. I redid a Rodin's Thinker. I did a tableau, a Picasso still life in 3 dimensions.
Okay.
So I did all of these. This is what I showed at Griffin. Before that show even came down, I got hired to teach in England. And so I went off to Europe for the next 4 or 5 years. I've always done collage.
Okay.
The ones that have shown in the past few years, obviously those were done in
More recently.
Yeah.
Tell me how the prefab dreams came about. It's a more recent body of work.
I've always, maybe this was my years in telling stories in narrative film or reading so much, whatever. I have a need to tell stories every now and then.
Right.
And they have to be somewhat representational. I collect things. In the old days I used to collect big things, cars and things. Now I collect ephemera. And so I work those into collages. Even the reductive work I do is kind of a collage, because I spend a lot of time, like doing a paint sample or a pattern or something, and I'll move it next to something else, and I kind of move things around. There's a lot of looking and editing, and I would say my process in everything I do is collage. It's just that some of it is so reductive. You probably have experienced this. When you become a homeowner, all of a sudden you start getting all these catalogs, furniture, the ideal room, what can I say? They all look great. I want that room. Yeah, I want that room. I want, And I started, sort of seeing these. And again, part of my collecting thing is we get magazines in or catalogs, and they go to the studio, and I'll, in a down moment, I go through them, I tear out things that are interesting, and then I move on. And then some of them, I look at them and I go, I can't have that room. I can't have that, that Vasily chair as much as I want it. So I paint it. And again, they're in this kind of reductive, just line and color and shape.
Oh, I think they're fabulous.
Thank you.
Absolutely love them. There's a Matisse influence that I see. Maybe you're not conscious of it, but
I am very conscious of it, and this is that thread, from Matisse to Craig Kaufman.
Yeah.
There's a lot of artists who were influenced by Craig, were students or close to him, who have that same kind of sensibility.
Reconcilable Differences has to do with your wife Lisa and her work, being a poet, and you're a painter, and the two of you collaborate. The result is fascinating. I mean, tell me about it.
We're married by law and by nature. I think it started with her wanting to make an object or two.
Yeah.
And she said, well, would you do this image or that image for me? And I go, sure, and so, and then she, she'd have that, and then we started thinking, this works. And then we really thought about it, because I don't illustrate, her poems. If it's me making the object and her providing the words, then we try to make them match.
I see.
Okay? They're equal to each other. She would give me a poem, and I'd start to think about how we,
what images came to mind.
Yeah, or the vehicle that would carry that text. Okay?
Sure.
In seeing Tom's recent work in the last few years, certainly come to mind, it's quite excellent.
Oh, it really is.
In a lot of ways, Tom's kind of a undersung, underappreciated artist.
And so to engage as many senses as the viewer has is important. So if these somewhat geometric shapes have a value change within them, or a dimension where they start to get a sense of being not a flat form but a dimensional form, that's important to me.
So there's just tons of art references in his work. And the other thing I like about his work is that it functions on two levels because of that. Because on the one level, you can see the art historical references, but then on another level, there's a structure and an elegance to the work that stands on its own, even for people that don't know those references.
Tell me about what you're working on most currently.
I just finished a series of paintings based on the 7 deadly sins. There's some ideas I've had in my head for 20 years, and it's just finding the right time. I'm only about 4 or 5 paintings into it, 6 paintings into it, and they kind of blend sort of medieval woodcut imagery with contemporary images, and a lot of patterning, a lot of paint, which, the reductive work for me is very thin, very flat.
Yes.
So this is an attempt, this
More
is
painterly.
Yeah, it lets me push the paint around.
The other thing too with Tom's work, like so many artists that were putting other things into their work, Tom also looked at and was very keen on popular culture. And so there's a lot of popular culture, not so much I'd say in this work, although you can really see that in some ways. Like, for instance, this color, that's right out of a house painting from the 1950s. And Tom used to paint houses. That's true. So those kind of attention to detail are something that he pays a lot of attention to.
I spoke about, the 3 main mentors I had in graduate school, and I talked about the elegance and the simple beauty of what they did, and I think that is what I'm aspiring to. It's sort of a Baroque minimalism. Okay. Now, some art historian out there is going to say, that's absurd.
Right. It's an oxymoron,
It's an
on its
oxymoron.
face.
Yeah. Maybe it is, but to me it kind of makes sense, because what I'm interested in is that dynamic that the Baroque brought to the traditional art of the Renaissance. So now we're in a position where I think, that old-fashioned idea, philosophical idea of truth and beauty.
Okay.
And that's essentially what my search is. I'll probably never get there.
Well, I think you already have.
No, well, thank you. But I think this is a process.
Right.
I don't think it's something where you
there's
hit the top of the mountain and you wave the flag.
No, I understand. Well, you've shown for decades, and you've had museum shows, and you've been a part of the dialogue now for decades. But I just see an intelligence to the work. I see a train of thinking and thought and connections to the history of the world, not just American history, European history. I see this broad comment on the way you see the world, and I think it's very unique. There's no one I know of that has a body of work like you have, and I've considered you a mentor, and I'm honored to know you and call you a friend. Very grateful to have this time together.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate your friendship.
Thank you, sir.